The great question: imagine waking up one day and realizing that everything you've ever pursued, everything you've sacrificed for, every sleepless night and desperate decision, it was all for something that was never meant to be caught, because you lacked discipline, intelligence, or opportunity, but because the thing you were chasing was never real in the way you thought it was. You stand in front of the mirror, staring at a face that carries the quiet weight of exhaustion. It's not the kind that sleep can fix. It's a deeper tiredness, the kind that seeps into the bones of your spirit. You've done everything the world told you would make you happy, earned enough money to be comfortable, curated a life that looks admirable on the outside, collected moments and milestones like trophies, and yet, there's an emptiness that gnaws at the edges of every accomplishment. No one talks about that emptiness, at least, not in a way that feels honest. They bury it under Instagram captions, productivity hacks, and shallow gratitude lists. They tell you to focus on the positives and manifest more joy, as if the human condition were a Pinterest board you could just rearrange into perfection. But here's the paradox: the more you chase happiness, the more it seems to slip away. Like a shadow stretching out ahead of you, it always stays just out of reach. And the cruelest part, the chase itself begins to define your life. You start to wonder, if you stopped running, if you stopped wanting happiness, would there be anything left of you? You can't help but notice that your happiest memories were rarely the ones you engineered. They came uninvited, sitting on a friend's porch in the fading light of summer, losing yourself in laughter that made your ribs ache, holding someone you love in the quiet after an argument when no words were needed. Moments like these arrive when you're not looking for them, yet you spend most of your life looking. And still, the cultural message is clear: happiness is a product, and you are the consumer. Buy the right experiences, the right clothes, the right supplements, the right retreats. Spend enough money and time, and you'll unlock it. You're taught to measure your worth by the frequency of your smiles and the smoothness of your Instagram feed. And if you feel hollow, well, that's just proof you haven't tried hard enough. But what if happiness wasn't something you could capture at all? What if, in your relentless pursuit of it, you were destroying the very conditions that allow it to exist? What if the cost of chasing happiness was paradoxically your ability to truly feel it? Think about it. When was the last time you were fully content without thinking about whether you were happy? When was the last time you stopped scanning your life for proof that you were doing okay? When was the last time you just were, without evaluating, without comparing, without needing it to be something more? The great thinkers of history warned us about this trap. Epicurus suggested that pleasure, when over-pursued, becomes its own form of suffering. Nietzsche wrote about the danger of making life's meaning dependent on distant ideals. And in modern times, psychologists like Gabor Mate have pointed out how our constant hunger for something better is often rooted in unresolved wounds from the past, wounds that can't be healed by chasing fleeting emotional highs. Still, the chase is seductive. It gives you something to aim for, a reason to keep moving. The promise that the next thing will finally be the thing is intoxicating. But what if that promise is a lie, not a malicious one, but a structural one? What if you're not just chasing happiness, but being trained to chase it endlessly because that's what keeps the machinery of modern life turning? And here's the unsettling question: if happiness, as you've been taught to think of it, is an illusion, then what's left? If the finish line doesn't exist, do you stop running, or do you find a different reason to run? You might resist asking these questions because deep down, you fear the answer. You fear that without this pursuit, without the constant carrot dangling just beyond your reach, you'll collapse into apathy, or worse, you'll be forced to face yourself without the distraction of the chase. But maybe, just maybe, the fear itself is the doorway, because if the pursuit of happiness is a trap, then escaping it means redefining not just what you want, but who you are without the wanting. And that is where the real danger lies, and the real possibility, the hidden problem and its psychological, philosophical roots. To understand why chasing happiness so often leaves us emptier than when we began, we have to look beneath the surface to the subterranean architecture of the human mind and the society that shaped it. It begins with a simple but unsettling truth: we are meaning-making creatures. From the moment we can form memories, our brains begin constructing narratives about who we are, what the world is, and how we should live in it. But those stories are not neutral. They are inherited, built from the language of our parents, the values of our culture, the myths of our time. In the modern West, one myth dominates: that happiness is both the ultimate goal and the ultimate measure of a life well lived. This idea is so embedded in our collective psyche that questioning it feels almost sacrilegious. But as Carl Jung might remind us, when an ideal becomes unconscious, it becomes dangerous. What we do not question begins to control us. From early childhood, we are conditioned to equate external achievement with inner fulfillment. The gold star on the homework sheet, the praise for winning the game, the applause for performing well, these are seeds planted early, and they grow into the unspoken belief that happiness is a reward for meeting certain conditions. You learn that you must earn it. As you grow, the stakes get higher. Grades turn into degrees, degrees into jobs, jobs into promotions. Along the way, you're told to follow your passion, but passion becomes tangled with performance. You no longer ask, what makes me feel alive? You ask, what will make me look successful enough to feel alive? Nietzsche saw this as a profound misalignment of values. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he warns against last men, those who trade the challenge and risk of existence for the comfort of predictable pleasures. They believe themselves happy because they no longer strive for anything dangerous or unknown, but in truth, they have surrendered their vitality. In psychological terms, this dynamic ties closely to what Viktor Frankl called the existential vacuum. When meaning is absent, we try to fill the void with sensations, pleasures, distractions, even manufactured joy. But these substitutes wear thin quickly, requiring more and more stimulation to produce the same emotional impact. The result is a quiet form of addiction, not necessarily to substances, but to the feeling of being momentarily lifted out of ourselves. This is where modern consumer culture finds fertile ground. Aldous Huxley's Brave New World was prophetic in this regard. A society that doesn't need to control people through fear if it can keep them endlessly entertained and chemically satisfied. You don't need to chain people who willingly distract themselves from their own dissatisfaction. The hidden problem isn't just that happiness is hard to catch, it's that we've mistaken a fleeting emotional state for a sustainable foundation. True happiness, if it exists, is closer to what the Stoics called eudaimonia, a flourishing of life in alignment with virtue and reason, not a spike of pleasure or the absence of discomfort. But our culture rarely makes this distinction. Instead, it teaches us to seek the emotional high itself, even if it means ignoring the deeper currents that give life stability. And here lies another twist. The human brain is wired to adapt to whatever it experiences regularly. Psychologists call it hedonic adaptation. You buy the new car, land the dream job, or finally take that trip you've been saving for, and for a moment, you feel the rush. But soon, the novelty fades. What was once extraordinary becomes ordinary, and the baseline resets. The happiness you felt is now gone, replaced by the urge for the next upgrade, the next milestone, the next fix. From a neurological standpoint, this makes sense. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter often linked to pleasure, is not primarily about reward. It's about anticipation. It spikes when you are pursuing something, not when you have it. The high of chasing happiness is chemically different from the feeling of contentment. And in a culture built on growth, consumption, and perpetual striving, the chase itself is monetized. This cycle becomes self-perpetuating. The more we chase, the more our brains learn to associate pursuit with excitement and arrival with disappointment. We are conditioned to keep running, because slowing down feels like emotional withdrawal. Jung would see in this a form of collective shadow, the disowned truth that our obsession with happiness is often rooted in fear. Fear of stillness, fear of meaninglessness, fear of facing the parts of ourselves we've buried beneath the noise of constant striving. When you stop chasing, you're forced to confront the possibility that your life scaffolding, the entire structure of your choices, was built around an illusion, and society, perhaps unconsciously, has no interest in you making that discovery. An economy that thrives on dissatisfaction cannot afford too many people learning to be content with less. You must remain slightly unsatisfied, slightly restless, always looking toward the horizon where happiness allegedly waits. But here's the quiet tragedy. In orienting your life toward an imagined future, you become alienated from the present moment. Your relationships become vehicles for self-improvement. Your downtime becomes a checklist of self-care tasks. Even your pleasures are instrumentalized means to an end, rather than ends in themselves. You may begin to notice the symptoms. The inability to enjoy something without thinking about how it could be better. The gnawing anxiety that you're falling behind. The hollow feeling that comes even in moments that are supposed to be perfect. These aren't personal failures, they are the predictable results of living inside a worldview that makes happiness conditional and fleeting. And the most dangerous part, the more you feel this way, the more you're told the solution is to try harder, to double down on the chase, to optimize, upgrade, and never stop improving. But improvement toward what? If the goal is an ever-moving target, what are we really running toward? And at what point do we realize that the price of chasing happiness might be the very peace we thought we were buying? You can feel the question tightening around you, like a noose that's been invisible until now, because once you see the trap, you can't unsee it. The next step is to face what happens when you keep running anyway. The unseen consequences. You tell yourself you're fine, that everyone feels this way sometimes, that the restless itch in your chest, the constant recalibration of your goals, is just being ambitious. But over time, something subtle happens. The chase stops being a conscious choice, it becomes your default mode of existence. You wake up already scanning the day ahead for potential wins, ways to get closer to that elusive emotional summit. You can't remember the last time you truly did nothing without feeling guilty about it. This is the first consequence. Life begins to collapse into a series of transactions. Time becomes currency, and you spend it with the precision of an investor, but the returns are never as high as you expect. That coffee with a friend isn't just coffee anymore. It's networking. That book you're reading isn't for pleasure. It's self-improvement. Even your moments of rest are carefully curated to optimize future productivity. Soon, your inner world reflects this same economy. Every experience is evaluated for its happiness yield. Was that dinner worth the time? Did that vacation deliver the emotional ROI you imagined? You stop being present because you're always calculating, always comparing the current moment to an imagined better one. It's not just exhausting, it's corrosive. Because once you start treating happiness like a product, you begin to consume your own life as if you were its customer instead of its participant. The second consequence is relationship erosion. When happiness is your main pursuit, people inevitably become part of the equation, either as contributors to your joy or as obstacles in the way. You may not say it out loud, but you begin to weigh interactions against the emotional payoff they provide. Friends who can't keep up with your pace start to fade into the background. Family gatherings feel like interruptions to your real life. Romantic partners are evaluated not just for compatibility, but for their ability to maintain your emotional high. And when they inevitably fail to do so, you quietly move on, convinced the next person will be different. But here's the bitter truth: if you're chasing happiness through others, you're also setting them up to fail. No one can be a permanent source of joy. And when you replace people as quickly as you replace goals, you lose the stability and depth that only time and persistence can create. The third consequence is a shrinking tolerance for discomfort. If you've trained yourself to constantly seek pleasure and avoid pain, you begin to see discomfort as a threat rather than a teacher. You leave jobs too quickly, abandon projects at the first sign of struggle, or avoid conversations that might be emotionally taxing. Ironically, this robs you of the very experiences that could have brought meaning and long-term satisfaction. Nietzsche warned that joy and suffering are woven from the same thread, that to avoid one is to diminish the other. By insulating yourself from discomfort, you also insulate yourself from growth. Soon, even mild inconveniences feel intolerable. The commute, the awkward silence in a conversation, the quiet evening without plans, these moments start to feel like failures rather than natural parts of life. You forget that happiness is often born from contrast, that the sweetness of a moment is magnified precisely because it follows difficulty. The fourth consequence is a creeping sense of alienation from yourself. When happiness is your compass, you rarely stop to ask if the direction you're running in is actually yours. You adopt society's definition of success and mistake it for your own. At first, the symptoms are subtle, a faint dissonance between what you're doing and how you feel. But over time, this dissonance deepens into a split. Jung would call it a fracture between the persona, the mask you present to the world, and the shadow, the parts of you that remain unexpressed. You might find yourself waking in the middle of the night with the unsettling thought that you don't know who you are anymore without your goals. Or worse, that your goals are just borrowed scripts, performed so convincingly you've forgotten they weren't yours to begin with. The final, and perhaps most dangerous, consequence is the normalization of dissatisfaction. At some point, you stop expecting to feel content for more than a few fleeting moments. The restless hunger becomes so constant that it feels normal. You start to assume that everyone feels this way, that this is just life. But it's not life. It's life inside a system that profits from your perpetual dissatisfaction. The ads you see, the algorithms you scroll through, the conversations you have at dinner parties, they all reinforce the idea that something better is always just out of reach. This is why the problem is so insidious. You're not only chasing happiness, you're living in an environment designed to make you believe you haven't found it yet. Even when you have moments of genuine joy, you second-guess them. Are they enough? Shouldn't you be feeling more? Is this all there is? And here's the cruel twist. The more these consequences take hold, the harder it becomes to stop running. Stopping means silence. It means stillness. It means standing face to face with the parts of yourself you've been outrunning for years, and you don't know what you'll find there. You don't know if you can handle it. So you keep moving, not because you believe the finish line is close, but because you're afraid of what will happen if you stop. This is the hidden cost of chasing happiness. Not just the exhaustion, not just the alienation, but the way it subtly reshapes your very sense of self. It changes the architecture of your mind until the idea of simply being feels foreign, until rest feels like a waste, until joy feels like something you must earn, not something you can simply experience. And once you've reached this point, the chase isn't just a behavior, it's an identity. You are no longer someone who seeks happiness, you are someone who must seek it, because the alternative feels like falling into an abyss. But what if that abyss wasn't what you think it is? What if, instead of swallowing you whole, it held the very freedom you've been searching for? The thought lingers like a whisper you're not ready to answer. But sooner or later, you will have to. The rebellion, how to break free. Imagine, for a moment, that you stop running. The world doesn't applaud. There is no parade, no certificate declaring you have reached some enlightened state. Instead, there is silence, dense and unfamiliar. Your phone still buzzes. Your responsibilities still wait. But you, for the first time in years, are not lunging toward the next thing. At first it feels wrong, like leaving a party early when everyone else is still dancing. Your instincts scream at you to get back in the race, to reclaim the momentum you've lost. But beneath the noise, a quieter truth begins to emerge. Maybe this isn't losing. Maybe this is the beginning of winning in a way you never understood before. Breaking free from the chase is not about rejecting happiness. It's about rejecting the version of happiness you were sold. The one that keeps you hooked like a gambler chasing the next big win. This rebellion starts not with grand declarations, but with small, deliberate acts of disobedience against the cultural script. Step 1. Redefine the game. The first act of rebellion is to stop treating happiness as a finish line and start seeing it as a byproduct. This requires what the Stoics called a shift from outcome to process. Marcus Aurelius didn't write in his meditations about chasing joy. He wrote about living in accordance with virtue, aligning one's actions with what is right and within one's control. Joy in this framework is not the goal, it's a side effect of living well. To practice this, you have to detach your sense of worth from constant emotional highs. Instead of asking, will this make me happy, you start asking, is this aligned with who I want to be? That question shifts the entire landscape of your decisions. Step 2. Reclaim discomfort. We've been taught to fear discomfort, to see it as the enemy of happiness. But discomfort is not a threat, it's a signal. It's the space where growth and authenticity often live. Nietzsche called this the yes to life, saying yes not only to the pleasant parts, but also to the chaos, the struggle, the pain that makes joy possible. The rebellion here is simple but radical. Instead of running from discomfort, you lean into it. You stay in the hard conversation. You sit with boredom instead of reaching for your phone. You work through the plateau in your creative project, instead of abandoning it for something new. This doesn't mean masochism. It means recognizing that a meaningful life is textured, and that texture is what gives happiness its depth when it arrives. Step 3. Slow the pulse of consumption. Consumer culture thrives on keeping you slightly dissatisfied. Every ad, every influencer's post, every new must-have product whispers that you are one purchase away from a better life. The counterattack is intentional limitation, not as punishment, but as a way of proving to yourself that you can be whole without constant upgrades. You stop chasing the newest version of everything: clothes, gadgets, even experiences, and instead allow yourself to inhabit what you already have. The unexpected effect. You start to notice the richness in the ordinary. A worn sweater becomes comforting. A familiar park becomes sacred. You stop treating life as a series of transactions, and it begins to feel like an ongoing conversation with the world around you. Step 4. Reconnect with presence. Presence is more than living in the moment. It's about fully occupying the space you're in without measuring it against what came before or what might come next. Buddhist teacher Thich described presence as touching life deeply in every moment, washing dishes to wash dishes, drinking tea to drink tea, without rushing toward the next thing. This is harder than it sounds because it strips you of your safety net. You can't hide in anticipation or nostalgia. You have to meet the rawness of now. One way to train this is through simple, grounded rituals. Eat a meal without screens. Walk without headphones. Listen to someone without planning your response. It feels slow at first, almost painfully so, but that slowness is exactly what begins to unhook you from the pace of the chase. Step 5. Create without calculating. In a world obsessed with metrics, views, likes, followers, ROI, creating something purely for its own sake is an act of defiance. Whether it's writing, painting, gardening, or cooking, you let go of the question, will this make me happy? And replace it with, what happens if I just do this because I can? When you create without attaching it to performance or payoff, you begin to reclaim a part of yourself that existed before the chasser self that played, experimented, and made things simply because it was alive. Step 6. Learn to sit in the abyss. Perhaps the hardest rebellion of all is learning to sit in that empty space you've been running from. Jung believed that within the shadow, the part of ourselves we avoid, there is immense creative and transformative power. But to access it, you must first stop distracting yourself from it. This might mean facing uncomfortable truths that your goals were never yours, that your idea of happiness was inherited, that some parts of your life are hollow because you built them for someone else's approval. These realizations can be destabilizing, even painful, but they are also the foundation for freedom. Because once you've looked into that abyss and stayed there long enough to see that it doesn't kill you, you become less afraid. And fear is the fuel that keeps the chase alive. The paradox of freedom. Here's the paradox. When you stop trying to be happy all the time, happiness has room to show up. Not the explosive, Instagram-worthy kind, but the quiet, grounded contentment that doesn't demand constant novelty to survive. You begin to notice it in unlikely places, in the sound of rain against the window, in the way sunlight hits the kitchen counter, the deep exhale after finishing something hard. You stop interrogating these moments for proof that you're doing life right, and instead, you let them be what they are, gifts you didn't have to earn. This is the rebellion's quiet victory, the realization that happiness is not the destination of your life's journey, it's the scenery along the way, visible only when you're not staring at the horizon. The next section will explore the deepest layer, the final and most powerful realization. What happens when you stop not only the chase for happiness, but the belief that happiness is life's ultimate measure, the ultimate truth, the final, most powerful realization. Imagine you've dismantled the scaffolding of your life. The ambitions you once clung to no longer hold the same charge. The ladder you were climbing has vanished, and the horizon you were running toward has dissolved into mist. At first, this feels like loss. Without the chase, you feel untethered, as if you've stepped off a moving train and are standing in the middle of an unfamiliar field. You're not sure whether you've escaped or been abandoned, but as the days pass, something strange happens. You start to see more clearly. Without the constant forward pull of desire, the present begins to sharpen in detail. The air feels heavier in your lungs, colors appear more saturated. The pace of the world slows just enough for you to notice its texture. This is when you realize something you'd missed all along. You were never chasing happiness. You were running from stillness. The truth, perhaps the most uncomfortable truth of all, is that the deepest fulfillment doesn't come from the perpetual satisfaction of desire, but from the capacity to be at peace when desire is absent. This is the part no one tells you, because it can't be sold, packaged, or marketed. It's not an experience you can post about. It's a state of being you can't prove to anyone else. Philosophers and mystics have been trying to point to this for centuries. The Buddhist concept of nirvana, the Stoic ideal of ataraxia, the Christian idea of surrender to God's will, the Taoist principle of Wu, where they all circled the same realization. The ultimate freedom is the ability to rest in life as it is, without needing it to be different in order to feel whole. But there's a reason so few reach this state. It demands the death of an identity you've carried your whole life. The you who needs to constantly improve, to achieve, to prove worthiness. To be happy, that self has to dissolve, and dissolution always feels like dying. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But becoming yourself is not about adding, it's about stripping away. You shed the roles that were handed to you, the ambitions that were programmed into you, the definitions of success that were never yours to begin with. What remains is raw, unadorned, and startlingly simple. You are not a project to be completed. You are not a product to be optimized. You are not a problem to be solved." And once this sinks in, something extraordinary happens. You stop needing happiness to validate your existence. This isn't to say you won't feel joy anymore, far from it, but joy stops being the goalpost you measure your life against. It becomes like weather, sometimes bright, sometimes overcast, always changing, and never under your full control. And here lies the freedom. When you stop trying to control the weather, you begin to appreciate every season. You can sit in the rain without resenting it. bask in the sun without clinging to it, and walk through the fog without needing it to lift before you can feel okay. Life becomes less about managing your emotional climate and more about living deeply in whatever climate you find yourself in. From this place, your relationship with discomfort changes. You no longer treat it as an interruption to happiness, but as a legitimate and even necessary part of life's richness. You stop editing your life to remove all difficulty because you recognize that difficulty is the thread that gives joy its shape. You also notice that your relationships transform. When you're not depending on others to make you happy, you stop treating them as emotional investments that must yield returns. Love becomes less conditional. Connection deepens because you are no longer interacting with people as part of a happiness strategy. You're simply present with them in all their complexity. In the end, the great irony is that the moment you stop demanding constant happiness is the moment you make space for a deeper, steadier form of it to take root. Not the high of achievement or novelty, but the grounded contentment that can survive both joy and sorrow. This is the shift from chasing to receiving, from striving to allowing, from life as a problem to be solved to life as an unfolding mystery, to be lived. The ultimate truth, then, is not that happiness is bad or that you should avoid it. It's that happiness is too fragile to carry the weight of your entire life's meaning. When you make it the central pursuit, you chain your sense of self to something that is, by nature, fleeting. But when you center your life on presence, integrity, curiosity, and compassion, you create a foundation that can hold you steady in both joy and despair. Happiness becomes a guest who visits often but doesn't need to stay forever for you to feel whole. And maybe this is the final paradox. When you let go of happiness as your purpose, you discover something richer than happiness. You find peace. And peace, unlike happiness, doesn't vanish the moment circumstances change. It doesn't depend on the next promotion, the next relationship, the next adventure. Peace is available in the middle of chaos. It's available in grief. It's available in the mundane repetition of daily life. It's there when you wake up in the night staring at the ceiling, uncertain of what comes next. It's there in the quiet breath before a hard conversation. It's there when you laugh so hard you cry, and it's still there when the laughter fades. One day you'll realize that the field you stepped into when you stopped running wasn't empty after all. It was spacious, and in that spaciousness you were never lost. You were finally home. Not because you caught happiness, but because you stopped mistaking it for the point of life. And maybe, just maybe, that's the truth you were running toward all along.